Hi, everyone. It's Barb Egan from Therapy Talks. And on today's show, we have Jana Glass from Atlanta, Georgia, who's a licensed professional counselor who's certified in brain spotting, addiction, and perinatal mental health. Today, we talk about parenthood and the challenges surrounding infertility, miscarriage, perinatal, and postpartum mental health care. And we talk about creating a pathway to healing, some misinformation around that or around these struggles, disenfranchised grief. What is that? How does it show up? How can we help our friends or family members who have gone through some sort of this kind of grief? And we talk a lot on brain spotting and how it relates to pregnancy and the body experience, how we integrate your experience, make meaning of it, how it's hard to get relief from just talk therapy, and maybe brain spotting could be right for you. So we unpack a lot of this, not only to take away the negative emotion, but also towards positive growth and kind of get back to a harmonious reaction to normal life. You're in Atlanta now. Maybe tell us, Jenna, a little bit about your journey, like where you're from, how you got into counseling, where you're at now, and then we can unpack some things. Because, like I said, I'm a mom of three, and I'm so excited to hear from you and hear your wisdom and expertise and the areas that you work in.
It was started out serendipitous how I got into the perinatal aspect of the field. I had moved an office close to an area where there were multiple assisted reproductive clinics. And so I started getting referrals for people who were having trouble conceiving. And so I put a lot of energy and time into getting additional education in that area and really learning more about all the pitfalls that can happen when you have difficulties of all kinds on your way to being a parent. And so, as I was doing all of that, I was like, well, thank goodness that won't be my story, right? But life imitating art or art imitating life. As I found myself in a position to want to build my own family, I actually experienced a lot of the same challenges that my clientele were. I think there's the trauma we bring into the journey to start that has nothing specifically to do with being a parent. And then there can be trouble conceiving pregnancies, maintaining those. There can be difficult births that happen, as well as difficult postpartum. And I personally experienced difficulty at kind of every leg of that journey, and found my own personal healing through my own healing journey with therapy, specifically brain spotting. And it just energized me further to do several things. One, help people heal, and two, help other professionals get the appropriate training to be able to help others heal further and more deeply, for themselves on their journeys, because these are huge injuries that happen and huge ruptures of trust in yourself, in the people around you, in the story that you thought your life was going to be.
Right, right. Yeah.
And, parenthood is such a journey anyway. And
Mm.
there's so much wrapped up in identity. And so a lot of people have an idea of how their journey to parenthood's going to go. And when that doesn't happen, it's more than just not getting what you want. It's literally challenging your whole identity and who you believed yourself to be. So this isn't just simply preferences. This is a whole shakeup of your foundation. And I think a lot of times that gets missed, as well as if someone does finally reach an outcome they were seeking, that other people who weren't intimately involved really see the invisibility of the process. They're like,
Right,
well, you got your child or children
right.
or however that happens. And so I think there's a false belief that the journey, once you reach the end, it undoes everything you've experienced. And in my experience, it actually just amplifies everything you've been through.
Wow, that's so true. And that word invisible, like the invisible loss of, a miscarriage or one of those stages, as you described, is so real because it's like not a lot of people may not even know that's the journey you're walking through right now, because you're right, it's so tied to an identity, to the core of who you are, your deepest desires of who you want to be and what you want for your life. You're not going to let just anybody in, or even close people in, because it's so vulnerable.
We get so many messages about the actual process of having a baby. And so many people think that it should just be an innate ability and something that should just come easy, when in reality, people's experience doesn't match that. I mean, some people it does, but 1 in 4 pregnancies don't find their way to a live birth. They end in some kind of miscarriage or stillbirth. And 1 out of 8 people trying to conceive are going to need some kind of assisted reproduction. And so, as we're going through that, people often feel alone and isolated and feel like they're the only one. But in reality, they're in good company. But in the isolation and in all the difficult feelings people are experiencing, people do tend to step away. And it does exacerbate a lot of the feelings that are really overwhelming. And especially, it feels like everyone around you is getting pregnant without effort, which may or may not be true, but that's how it feels. And so I think it silences people further. And, with social media, there are more people being more vocal. But it's, some of that is good information that is really helpful, and some of it is not. And so it's knowing your sources and knowing, what information is actual and practical and fits within the scope of what assisted reproduction and perinatal specialists would say is accurate, and what is actually not. And so I think it can be used really, really fantastically, and it can also spread a lot of misinformation.
That's so true, because you often hear when I'm walking with women or couples through this, and sometimes it helps them to say what this person said to them that actually wasn't helpful whatsoever. Or, well, at least you have this, your older child, which I know that person meant well, but that does not help whatsoever. So, would you kind of highlight some of that, maybe some of the things not to say, or that misinformation that you said, with people walking through some of this? And then on the other side, like what is that process like with you? What are some helpful things, or what would, a specialist say in these contexts?
Sure. I think some of what happens in the beginning challenges is that people say, just relax, just go on vacation. And if you do, once you stop focusing on it, you'll get pregnant easily.
Right. You're
And
focusing too much. You're trying too hard. Don't force
right.
it. Yeah.
Well, and the stress is keeping you from getting pregnant, when we know in reality that there are plenty of people that have lots of different stressors who are able to conceive and maintain a pregnancy. So that factor alone is not going to be the barrier. When it comes to a loss, people will say things like, well, at least you can get pregnant. And so, like, I guess that's pulling the teeniest silver lining out of a really difficult situation, because there are no guarantees in this process. And so, I think it minimizes to just focus on one piece. You know, um, Disenfranchised grief comes to mind, because people don't understand how you can miss someone you've never known. So they'll say, but like, you didn't know this baby, or that was only a few weeks, or it was etc. So like, what, I don't understand, how is this so sad? And the reality is that for many people, their hopes and dreams have really gone into this. So from the moment they recognize that there's a potential baby on the way, that they've already gone ahead in the future and are becoming in their minds a parent, and they are a parent. But so when that gets interrupted or doesn't go as planned, it's, for that person, it is actual grief, even if other people don't understand it. I think with birth, people will say, but you have a healthy baby. So, I mean, didn't the ends justify the means? And so nobody will ever tell you that they would want to risk their child. But sometimes what people experience is so overwhelming that you can hold both. You can be thankful that you have your baby and that they're healthy. And you can realize that you experienced a really awful event or series of events.
Yeah.
And both can be true.
Yes.
And that in putting someone in a position to feel like they have no right to their feelings because they reached an outcome isn't fair. And if there's a loss and then a subsequent, successful birth, then people will act as though that's undone the older stuff. And so, well, you finally got your baby, and that's true. And I still feel loss for the other baby that didn't make it earthside. And so, those types of things, some other specific things, some people have separation from their babies, like maybe their baby needs to be in neonatal intensive care. And so that was my experience. And people would say things to me like, well, isn't it great that you get to go home and get settled in and you get a little break without having to take care of in my case, it was babies. And in reality, I felt like I was leaving my heart in one place and that my body was in another, because nobody intends to leave the hospital without their child or children. And so when that happens, it's not a vacation, it's not a break. All I could focus on was their absence and how much I wanted them home, and how you never know with children in the NICU what the timeline will be, because it can move slowly and then suddenly get better quick. And so each day you're living with that uncertainty. And so people would be like, isn't it great? Like, you guys get to get a good night's sleep. And I was like, I'm so glad you think I'm sleeping. I'm pumping around the clock,
right.
And I don't have babies with me.
Right. It's that resounding emptiness. Like it's like yes. The silence is screaming.
Yes. So I guess in a nutshell, the don'ts fall into making assumptions of someone's experience and kind of deciding how they're making meaning of what's happening and just assuming the upside of things. And instead, it's not what you say, because nothing you say is going to make it better. Right. It's your presence.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's showing up consistently. It's just being there. It's talking or not talking. It's, allowing space for all the feelings, because rarely do any one event evoke one feeling. There's lots of feelings.
Yeah. And all are welcome. Like, all makes sense for you, given your story and what your experience. It's not wrong to feel a certain way.
Exactly. So if 1 minute someone's angry and the next minute they're sad and the next one they're exhausted, it's just being like, well, yeah, like that makes sense based on what you're experiencing. And I'm here for you and I love you. And that makes all the difference for that individual, because they're going to need the time to adjust to whatever's happening. And, if their story isn't complete in their mind yet, and they haven't built the family they desire, and they're going to keep moving forward, there's going to be more twists and turns because we just don't know. And so just being a constant presence of, I'm thinking about you, I'm checking in on you. How are you doing? Because I think a lot of people tend to be present in the very beginning of a concern, but over time they fall off. So if you're aware of someone having a loss, put it in your calendar. Don't be afraid to acknowledge it. That person will feel so seen and so heard and so understood by just acknowledging it. People think, oh, if I bring it up, I'm going to make them more upset. In reality, what I see is it makes people feel like their loss meant something, that it's real for them. And that their baby mattered, if that was what the loss was, or that their birth mattered, and that they have someone who's there for them. Because even if you have an ideal situation, becoming a parent can be really overwhelming. There's really nothing to prepare you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so even if you're like, I can't think of anything that was difficult for me, in actuality, like, parenting is really hard. And so having that support person who's just showing up for you is just such a huge, huge piece of this. And, you know, if you talk about how I work, I do a lot of validating and a lot of really trying to understand the person in front of me's experience. And so it doesn't matter if I see 10 people who've had a similar experience. I want to know how the person in front of me has experienced it. What was difficult for them? Were there any bright spots in the process? And what they're needing right now as far as support and understanding. And then most of all, creating a pathway to healing, like actual healing, where they feel better and are able to enjoy either the process to parenting or enjoy being a parent. The people I meet don't have an easy path. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but they don't come to my office. And so the least that they can do after going through an entire process to build their family is to be able to enjoy being a parent. That's everything.
So, what does that look like? Because I think, that's a huge statement. I think that could resonate with everybody. But parts of our stories, at least in some sense, probably weren't exactly how we imagined them. That we thought, okay, it's going to go like this, probably hasn't to the T. And for some of us, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of loss. What does that look like to kind of walk with people through that healing, whatever that looks like, whether through, infertility or miscarriage, stillbirth, or just like you said, enjoy being a parent. Like what does that look like? What does that process look like with you?
So it's really important to me to never, ever make any assumptions. And so that's when you hear that, that sounds like, oh, yeah, that's really easy to do. But actually, it's not. It's actually difficult. And so if someone, I'm thinking of a client who called me and said, I want to come in and because I've had a miscarriage. And so when they entered into my office, I just said, can you share with me, about your experience and how it's affected you? And she just burst into tears. And I said, what's going on? And she said, you're the first person who didn't decide for me that this was a horrible thing. She said, everybody immediately rushed at me with, I'm so sorry. And I'm sure this is so horrible. And, we're so sad for your loss. And she said, the truth is, this wasn't the right time. And the intended father wasn't the right person. And so I'm relieved. I'm relieved that this happened. And I feel like a horrible person because I'm relieved. And each time somebody apologizes to me or assumes that I'm super sad about this, I feel like a worse person. And so it's really holding everything back from deciding how someone is experiencing an event. And I think for this person in reality, she did have mixed feelings. And I think she did recognize and felt a loss and had relief. And so it's making space for all of it. That's what we're talking about, even if we ourselves could not imagine feeling that way. Because I think that's the skill that comes with it and having no judgment with it. And so just hearing everybody's truth and being with it, and then really understanding for them what better looks like. Because again, I think we can decide, oh, well, they should have another baby. Like, they're young, they're, full of light, like, etc. But instead, really being with the person and helping them to like figure out, what do I really want next? And like, is it what I want? Or is this what's wanted for me, etc. And, I think a lot of these things go beyond words. And so I think talk therapy is helpful and has its space and place. But I think some challenges need more brain and body based approaches. And I know just after listening to your podcast that you're really familiar with EMDR. And I am trained in EMDR. And one of the main things that I use is Brainspotting, which is another brain and body based approach in therapy. I'm not sure if you're as aware of it.
A little bit, but it's not very. So I'm very excited to hear about it.
So when you are talking about all of these different things in transitioning to parenthood, what involves your body more? right? And so you're so attuned and aware to what's happening to in your body. If you are anticipating a pregnancy or you suddenly find out you're pregnant, etc., it's such a body experience. And so regardless how far an individual pregnancy goes, and even if it's all the way to a live birth, it's so somatic, it's so in our bodies. And so when it comes to difficult events, it's really hard to get relief from just simply talking about them. And so brain spotting really harnesses the brain's natural ability to heal. And anything we are experiencing that's difficult or system overwhelming in the moment, which are all kind of definitions of trauma, there's different ones, those really tend to get stuck in our feeling brain. And then in present day, it shows up, that kind of stuckness shows up in everyday experiences. So sometimes that looks like, having a reaction that far exceeds the situation. Like an everyday event happens that will stink, like you have a flat tire, like that happens. But all of a sudden your reaction is so above what anyone would anticipate.
Right. So disproportional.
Disproportionate. Exactly. Great word. And it's really, that is one indicator that you really may have an overwhelmed nervous system, because even the day-to-day stuff that is inconvenient but does happen suddenly feels unmanageable. And so brain spotting allows us to bypass that thinking brain and get into that feeling brain. And any experience that's remained stuck there, it allows it to process through to completion. And it allows us in our day-to-day to go back to a more harmonious reaction. So no one's excited, like, yay, I have a flat tire. That's not really going to happen.
Right.
But instead going, oh, this is so inconvenient. All right, how do I want to deal with this? Instead of, feeling so overwhelmed that they don't feel like they can manage what's happening. And so I love this because for so many people, it really is focused on the uncertainty principle. And we don't have to know exactly what the problem is in order to help heal. So it might be someone comes in and says, wow, I'm just really overreacting. And I don't know why. And so we don't have to know the why to heal.
Wow, that's huge.
And it's absolutely huge. And what I also love about brain spotting is once we have kind of gotten through that healing process and it's more integrated, it can also be used to enhance positive feelings, or some people use it to enhance performance. So my perinatal clients, once we've kind of smoothed out on a brain level what their difficult experiences were, we can also help amplify what they need to keep moving forward. Whether that's courage, whether that's hope, whether, that's something else. For some people, it's a direct connection to God or their spiritual connections, but it also is able to amplify and enhance kind of that positive growth part. And it really can be a huge, huge resource as people are continuing on their journey.
Like you said earlier, of really enjoying parenthood or whatever that looks like. You don't just, that emotional storage part of your brain that can house those negative experiences or negative emotions. You can work through that, but then also have the positive side of it. Like that's quite amazing to have both of those perks, really.
Yeah. Well, I think if you go through a difficult journey, some people will be like, I've lost my fun side. Like, I'm not fun anymore. Right. Like, and so some people might be like, but I think that is, if we've learned nothing through the last 2 years of the pandemic, when we take the fun away, life gets pretty monotonous. And that it's often the fun that can bring us into feeling like, wow, all the have tos are worth it because I got to do this. And so it's important to help people tap into also those things. Like, it's not, yes, it's healing is so important, but it's also being like, so now that I feel more integrated, what kind of parent do I want to be? And nobody's one thing all the time, right? but saying like, yeah, I'd like to get some of that back, or my spontaneity, or, not being worried about a bad thing happening. I want to be able just to live in the moment and see what happens, whether it's good or bad. And that's the hard part of trauma, is that when we have active trauma, it messes up the timeline. And what I mean by that is, even if the event was 5 years ago, it feels ever present. If you're traumatized, it feels like it's always right here, right with you. And so what brain spotting allows is for it to take its rightful place in that timeline, so that it feels like it was 5 years ago. And as time moves on, you're getting further from it. And that is just such a gift, to be able to have that experience, have it be integrated, make the meaning that you need to make from it, and not have it carried with you ongoing.
So how do you do brain spotting? Because it sounds good. Like that was like, yeah, I wish I had a very traumatic first birth.
Okay.
And I'm just like, wow, I wish I would have known about this. Or even just your demeanor and talking to you. I'm like, oh, I wish I would have had you. And I share that quite a bit with clients, like walking through, whether it's pregnancy loss or, just postpartum mental health. I work a lot in, and just, wow, it's amazing to just sit with people and hold space for that. Is so beautiful. Like you said, it's presence. It's not always what you say, it's just being there. And that's that's the most important part. So brain spotting, how do you do it? What are some strategies?
Yeah, no, for sure. And so it's based on the principle that where you look affects how you feel. And it means that there's actually a fixed point in space that will connect to your unprocessed trauma. And so if we were working together, whether that was in person, or online, we would pick a starting point. So maybe going back to the tired thing, like, wow, I'm just really overreacting. So we'd have you get in touch with that feeling of overreacting and kind of honing down, is that anger? Is that frustration? Is it aloneness? Like, what is that? And then help you, if some clients can do this and some can't, but connect to how that feels in your body. It's okay if someone is not able to do that, because some clients are not. But for those who are, we have them connect with that feeling in their body and saying, oh, I feel like someone's standing on my chest. And then from there, the therapist is going to guide the person in finding that fixed point in space that is the most connected to that emotion in their chest. And then there's also techniques if someone can't get in touch with their feelings, so they don't have to worry. And it falls on the therapist to help find the spot. And then from there, just by looking in that direction, it's not what you see, it's the eye position. So people are able to shut their eyes or open their eyes. But what it does is it really connects to that unprocessed material and allows shifts to happen. So for some people, it's very somatic. As I was saying, I feel like someone's standing on my chest. Okay, that's less. Okay, that's more. Okay, now it's less. And it shifts to the positive. And for other people, it's like watching snapshots of their life. And so you're fully awake and present, but it can feel like a dream because it may jump around in the timeline. And there may be just parts of it that come out. There may be whole sequences. Neither one is right or wrong. Each person processes differently each time. But again, it processes towards the positive, and that somatic experience or, that anger, frustration drops down. And then you find, as it continues outside of session, that people see actual shifts in their life, that when someone spills a glass of milk, instead of flipping out and screaming, they're like, oh, wow, that stinks. We should clean that up. And sometimes the shifts are more subtle, but it really is very, very powerful. And a lot of clinicians use bilateral music, and that is special pan music that plays gently in one ear and then the other. It's not required, but for many people, it's enhancing the process. So that's also used. And it's really focusing on where the client wants to go, and it's very gentle. And so if someone feels like they're not ready to tackle a specific topic, we don't go there yet. And over time, either they end up having the bandwidth to go there, or sometimes in processing other pieces, it resolves the whole
Wow.
puzzle. It just depends on the individual. And so I know a lot of this sounds abstract. Really, the best way to learn about brain spotting is to go get a session, to be honest. But it's really powerful, and it's really focused on the attunement of the therapist, and not just to the content, because I think most therapists are really good about that, like listening and hearing. It's also attuning to the client's neurobiology. And noticing what's happening in their nervous system, what's happening with their body, and really learning how to be present and be able to track that. Because for a lot of clients, once they're in their process, they don't speak that much, and that's okay. So I may not know what they're focused on, but I'm really aware of how activated or how resourced they are in the process. And that feels really great, to be able to just track and be with them. And the therapist is there to make sure that the person really is not getting overwhelmed again. Because the last thing we want to do, you can have a strong emotional reaction and still be in your circle of capacity. We just want to make sure someone doesn't get so dysregulated that it's so upsetting that they become re-traumatized. And that's what the therapist is really there to help moderate as well. And making sure that it's a healing process for the individual and that everything feels better.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. And it is so true, because as humans, we co-regulate each other. And so that's so beautiful. And I love how you use the word integrate, with the brain and the body and your experience. And that's so beautiful, processing those emotions with that experience. So if someone, is listening to this, well, one, besides, some of the things that we mentioned, like infertility, traumatic births, miscarriages, loss, like a lot of trauma, grief, loss, what else can brain spotting help with? Like you said, performance. How would you know if brain spotting's right for you?
Well, I think a great indicator, a lot of people who come to see me have engaged in traditional talk therapy and they haven't reached their outcome. So I think that's a really good indicator. Because they've done cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy. And what we find from the trauma lens is that people can learn what they're supposed to do in a moment, but if they're traumatized, they have trouble operationalizing that in the moment. So I know I can know my acronyms and know what I'm supposed to do, but in the moment, I'm too overwhelmed to do it. And so if you're finding that traditional therapy routes are not getting you where you want to go, that's a great indicator. If something feels so painful that it feels difficult to talk about, that's a great indicator, because that's another thing about brain spotting, is that we don't need the long drawn out stories. Like if that's what a client feels like they need to heal, is to share it, we really need more the general overview of an experience, because we don't want to re-traumatize someone. So saying I was in a car accident or I had a major surgery is usually enough, as opposed to having to go into great detail about the experience. And again, that is client-based. Like some people need to be heard, but it's not anything they have to do. Because I think I hear that from a lot of clients is, that's part of what's hard about switching or starting therapy, is feeling like, oh, I have to talk about all this.
Right. I have to start all over again.
And so the brain spotting therapist is going to be assessing different things to make sure that brain spotting is the right fit for you. But that doesn't involve having to go in depth about what brings you to therapy.
And so how would you find, because this is a niche, this is a specialty, how would you find a brain spotting therapist? How would you even start to look? Like for, your traditional psychotherapist, Psychology Today is on there. Like where would somebody even look?
Yes. So the first place I would direct people to is brainspotting.com. And there's a lot of really good information and videos there, as well as a therapist directory. In addition, Psychology Today has added brain spotting as a modality. So in addition to all the other search approaches that you would use, in an area or insurance or et cetera, you can search for brain spotting. And I think more of the therapists listservs like that and are adding Brainspotting. Um, and also Googling it in your town, Brainspotting therapist Atlanta, or, wherever you're located, you can get more good information that way. And then also there are different institutes in different parts of the country. So there's like a Southeast Brainspotting Institute, there's a Rocky Mountain, etc. So as you're searching those, a lot of those have listservs, and you would be able to connect and identify folks that way. For the perinatal piece, I would really want to highlight Postpartum Support International. Postpartum.net is their website, and they have so many amazing offerings ranging from free support groups on a variety of topics. They also have a therapist search where you're able to search by areas and criteria internationally. And the other thing that they offer that I find completely amazing, that's no extra cost to anyone, is a psychiatric line. And so a lot of people have psychiatrists who prescribe to them during the perinatal period who may not fully have specific training in the population. And so the prescriber is able to make an appointment and have a consultation with a perinatal psychiatrist and staff the case at no charge. And so that's a huge resource. It's not a hotline. You have to make an appointment, but upon attending that appointment, they can get extra feedback and thoughts from an expert, because a lot of people, it's a cost benefit approach as far as medication during pregnancy and postpartum and breastfeeding. And so, these folks just stay up to date with the latest research, and some people have perinatal psychiatrists, and that's great. But for those who don't and who would like to have that consult, that's available there, along with lots of training for professionals, et cetera. So that's definitely a go-to for anyone who's experiencing anything in the perinatal or postpartum realm.
Oh, those are great resources. Oh, and so Jana, I mean, you're just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for that. Kind of as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say for women or families, couples going through these processes? Like, these are some of my favorite people to work with. I think it's so vulnerable, so honoring to be let in. Because like you said, someone will come in and say, I've never told anybody this, or no one else knows this is going on, or everyone else in my life is telling me I have to feel this way about it. What are some, I guess, tips to have, to build your mental health or take care of yourself, the self-care, if you will, if someone is struggling through any of these things, infertility, miscarriage, even in the postpartum realm of being a parent?
Completely. And the first is to know you're not alone, that so many people experience challenges in all or some of those pieces of the journey, and that isolation just feeds all the challenges you're having. And it is okay to say you need some support, whether that is in the form of an informal group, whether that is connecting to a professional, that we are not meant to go through all of these difficult events alone. That's part of the condition of being human. And so as people are going through their process and they open up to others, they find that a lot of people have had similar or other difficult experiences and are willing to be more vulnerable because someone else was. And so for people who know going in that they have some mental health challenges, just because that's kind of how they've been pre-parenting, or even for people who have not experienced any mental health issues, I think it's always helpful to connect to a therapist. And my reason for that is you don't know when a challenge will present itself. And some of the most difficult times is when we feel like we're in an emotional crisis. That is not the time that we want to suddenly pull up a list and start calling to see who has availability. So often I have partners reach out to me saying, hi, the birth giver's like not herself, and I don't know what's going on, and I'm not sure what to do, but I thought I'd call you. And, I think establishing a relationship with someone, having the rapport, even if it's just once a month that you're seeing the person throughout, your process of getting pregnant or staying pregnant, that when you need that person to be able to reach back out is such a gift, and to feel like you're returning to an existing relationship instead of trying to forging a new one when you don't feel right. When you feel like I'm already drowning, please don't add something else to this.
Right.
I think that part's really huge. And making sure that your care team, that you feel heard and understood and part of the process, whatever the process is. And I would tell anyone who doesn't feel those things that they need to look at other options and other providers. Because when we look at what decreases trauma, it is feeling empowered. It's feeling like you have a say. It's feeling like you have trust in your care team, that those help mitigate trauma and can turn a difficult event, instead it just leaving it as a difficult event, as opposed to it turning into a traumatic event. And so if you feel rushed through, if you don't feel like your wishes are being heard and considered, like those are really good indicators that it's time to make a change in your care team, because there are providers who will listen and who will support you and will help you feel like they are really there for you. And so it's a matter of connecting to who those folks are.
Oh, that's empowering. Yeah.
So those would be some of my best advice to folks. And also that, when you're in it, it seems like it's forever. And like, you feel like, oh my gosh, is this what I signed up for? Is this my life? And the reality is everything is just a phase and it will change. And even if it does not feel like it, it will get better. And so trying to hold on to, I know this feels like forever. I know this feels like I'm never going to get out of this, but I'm going to get to the next phase. That's going to happen. And keeping people around you who can keep you focused and supported while you're in the difficult one.
Yeah. That this too shall pass. I mean,
yes,
oftentimes kind of going back to, oh, well, just enjoy those baby snuggles, or, you had your baby, even if you had difficulty getting pregnant or a traumatic birth. Oh, enjoy those baby snuggles, which is great. Yeah, part of that's very true. But, sometimes this too shall pass. Like maybe there's some trauma or lingering or just overwhelm, and that's going to pass too. We don't just have to gloss over that and dismiss it. And I love how validating you are and just how you speak. And oh, it's just so beautiful.
And remember, trauma is treatable.
Yeah. Yes.
It is treatable. That like, I know it feels like this is forever, and it does not have to be. And with the right person and the right sense and venue of healing, that you can get to a place where it just feels like part of your life and that you don't feel emotionally charged by it anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point it's a great picture of it, that it's not as emotionally charging, retriggering anymore.
That's what trauma does. And so, like I said, with the right tool, then you're able to get to a place where it does just feel like part of the fabric of your story and not what's right in front of you, and not that guides everything that you end up doing, and allows you to enjoy the family that you've built.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, and Jana, where can we find you? Where can our listeners find you and follow you?
Absolutely. So my business name is Supportive Solutions. And so my website is supportivesolutionsga, like Georgia.com. I'm also on social media. You can find me on Facebook a lot of the time, for professionals who want more information about perinatal as a whole or Brainspotting. I do training, I do individual consultation and group consultation. So you can look for the Brainspotting and perinatal mental health group that is more geared towards professionals, as well as I have a phase training of the foundation training of Brainspotting that is through the perinatal lens. So it's directly applicable to that population as well as others. And that's coming up this September. And you can get more information on my website.
Awesome. So supportivesolutionsga.com.
Yes.
Oh, Jana Glass, Jana from Atlanta. Thank you so much for coming on. You are so warm and knowledgeable. And just thank you for kind of demystifying some of these big, heavy, traumatic, specific topics of infertility, miscarriage, traumatic births, even in that postpartum and perinatal mental health world. Thank you. And brain spotting. I mean, that's incredible. That is just amazing. I want to go learn more. Thank you. And again, for our listeners who do want to learn more about brain spotting, what was that website again?
It's brainspotting.com is a great first resource, and you'll see lots of links off of there. And I just want to thank you so much for your time and being able to help other people understand their experiences, because I think that's such a valuable part, is not feeling alone.
Yes, yes. Aw, well, thank you, Jana. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again for coming on.